Ladies and gentlemen, and dear student, we are immediately starting our fourth session on nuclear panacea in a global perspective. And for this, I would like to ask Lieutenant General Khalid Ahmed Kidwai, Advisor, National Command Authority, former Director General Strategic Plans Division, Islamabad, to please come and join us on stage. Lieutenant General Retired Khalid Ahmed Kidwai. I would like to request Dr. Anita Nilsson, Associate Partnership for Global Security at Washington, D.C., to please come on stage and join us. Dr. Anita Nilsson. Now I would like to invite Dr. Ansar Pervez, Advisor, National Command Authority on Nuclear Power, Islamabad, to please join us on stage. Dr. Ansar Pervez. Dr. Happymon Jacob, Associate Professor, Center for International Politics, Organization and Disarmament, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi, is going to join us online. I think Dr. Happymon Jacob is here with us. Now over to you, Lieutenant General Retired Khalid Ahmed Kidwai, sir. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, good evening. I would like to extend my sincere felicitations to the Pakistan Institute of International Affairs on the occasion of 75 years of its founding. In this long journey of academic and intellectual excellence, the Institute has made great contribution in the national discourse on a variety of subjects and issues of global and regional concerns, especially as these affect Pakistan. PIIA has come to be recognized not only as the eldest think tank of Pakistan, but also as an institute which has always stood for quality research and encouragement to the expression of free thought and ideas at conferences and seminars. I would particularly like to congratulate Dr. Masuma Hassan on her most successful stewardship of the PIIA. With an outstanding professional career and the service of Pakistan behind her, she has played her second innings with equally outstanding aplomb. Her name is synonymous with the quality and energy that Dr. Masuma Hassan has brought in anchoring and guiding PIIA towards the retention of focus on its aims and objectives. Thank you, Dr. Masuma, for your immense work. Thank you. The 75th anniversary conference on Pakistan and the changing global order that has been organized by PIIA is an outstanding example of an all-encompassing, comprehensive discourse which covers all aspects on all bases of the various dimensions of a challenging subject. The star-studded galaxy of Pakistani and international speakers comprising respected and authoritative voices on respective topics is indeed impressive. Ladies and gentlemen, we are living through interesting times. I think we are also living through historic times. In a sense, you and I are fortunate to be witnessing history unfold before our eyes in our lifetime as we watch three superpowers, the USA, Russia and China, competing, containing, and where possible confronting to establish their respective footprints for global supremacy. The chessboard is indeed fascinating. The USA has been an undisputed superpower since the end of World War II, particularly since the demise of the USSR. However, it has faced challenges to its world domination in the past and continues to face serious challenges to its status today. The second superpower of our time, the USSR, collapsed in the early 90s and passed on the mantle to the successor state of Russia. For 2 decades, Russia too has struggled to regain its, its superpower status politically, economically, militarily, and technologically. However, both Russia and the US have demonstrated vulnerabilities and the limits of power experienced through strategic debacles. In Afghanistan, with serious consequences for their respective geopolitical clout and global influence. Additionally, Russia directly and the US indirectly are now embroiled in Ukraine in what essentially is yet another struggle for power. The world anxiously awaits the conclusion of this conflict because, in my opinion, its eventual outcome will redefine the future global strategic equation in more than one way. From the specific perspective of today's session 4, this one that we are all sitting here, which is titled Nuclear Panacea in a Global Perspective, two issues are relevant and seem close to taking center stage in the Ukrainian conflict. One, energy as a strategic tool of war, and two, the possible use of nuclear weapons, especially tactical nuclear weapons, which is being talked about. Also, as a corollary of these issues, one could perhaps debate the hypothetical possibilities of what might have been if Ukraine had not given up its nuclear arsenal. It will be useful to hear the views of some of our eminent speakers. In the geopolitical milieu of today's global order or disorder, it is the third superpower of our era, China, which is emerging, perhaps has emerged, as the brand new superpower, posing multiple challenges to the US in the political, economic, military, and technological spheres, is now making soft inroads even in areas of traditional US influence. With Russia and China aligning against US supremacy, reiterating their positions as recently as in September this year at the meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO, the US finds itself confronted by strong challenges. The identifiable responses in the US geopolitical and economic strategies to retain its preeminent dominant position by the sheer force of its military industrial power and alliances stand out in considerable contrast to the strategies of China, seemingly more confident in exercising strategic patience in order to assert its global position of eminence through the tools of its economic power, its soft global reach, and growing military, nuclear, and technological prowess. Now, where does South Asia figure out in this emerging global world? And what are the emerging challenges for Pakistan, especially in the context of its national security interests, measured whether in economic terms, including the contribution of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes, or in military terms, including its capability as a nuclear weapons power as a tool of strategic deterrence? The two givens of Pakistan's strategic environments are one, that Pakistan enjoys a relatively advantageous position because of its geostrategic location as a potential trade and security corridor, and two, Pakistan is a responsible nuclear weapons power with the additional desire and capabilities to further its objectives in the field of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. While debating the possibilities of a nuclear panacea in a global perspective is all very well, and its various dimensions and implications will be most ably spoken about by the three eminent speakers of this session 4, I would like to stick my neck out and say with confidence that for Pakistan, whether in economic terms or in security terms, nuclear panacea is a godsend and has worked well to ameliorate many of Pakistan's concerns in both these areas. In military terms, Pakistan's nuclear capability has proven beyond doubt to be a security panacea, an asset, as it has satisfactorily addressed Pakistan's long-standing dilemma of conventional forces asymmetry with its adversary in the East. Because of a robust nuclear weapons capability articulated through the policy of full-spectrum deterrence, Pakistan is secure from possible aggression by its larger neighbor. I have said this on a number of occasions and would like to repeat for emphasis that Pakistan's nuclear capability as the great equalizer has proved to be an instrument of peace enforcement in South Asia. Now, in economic terms, Pakistan's civil nuclear energy program as a nuclear panacea is in a potentially take-off stage, provided the various governments of the day display the necessary vision, understanding, and support to Pakistan's Nuclear Energy Vision 2050, which was duly approved Pakistan's National Command Authority in 2011. The Nuclear Energy Vision 2050 envisages the provision of 42,000 megawatts of clean, safe, and relatively cheap energy to Pakistan's economic needs through the sequential installation of a series of nuclear power plants across the country in all four provinces. A salient feature of Nuclear Energy Vision 2050 is that very early on, after the installation of the first few pairs of nuclear power plants, the program starts to earn for itself and becomes self financing so as not to place any financial burden whatsoever on limited government resources. Pakistan's seven nuclear power plants, including four at Chashma and three at Karachi, are a pioneering effort of the Nuclear Energy Vision 2050 and have gone a long way in improving the capability of safe, clean, and efficient operations. The global politics of embargoes and restrictions inhibited Pakistan's ventures into this area for many years to Canap 1 only, that is Karachi Nuclear Power Plant 1, until China became Pakistan's reliable partner in the development of nuclear power. A 325 megawatt pressurized water reactor, a PWR, Chashma 1 was set up at Chashma in collaboration with China. Chashma 2, Chashma 3, Chashma 4, Canap 2 and Canap 3 followed, making it a total of 3,600 megawatts. K2 and K3, that is Canap 2 and Canap 3, are modern Generation 3 plants. There are plans to build more as per Nuclear Energy Vision 2050. The saying that it is difficult to make predictions, especially about the future, has really been true for nuclear power, which has seen many ups and downs for the 70 odd years that it has been around. Only a few decades ago, when people worried that fossil fuels would last only for another 100 to 150 years, the nuclear energy option presented itself as the new, practically limitless, safe, environment friendly, and economical base load option, a potential nuclear panacea. There was a nuclear rush, and before one knew, a few hundred nuclear power plants were operating in the developed countries, while India and Pakistan also ventured into the nuclear game. There was opposition to nuclear energy by some civil society groups, mostly in the developed countries, that were really going big on nuclear energy. But the nuclear experts professed a very strong, it is quite safe belief and paid only rudimentary attention to the opposition. Things were going great until the 3 Miles Island accident in 1979. A major blow was dealt to the development of nuclear energy, taking the wind out of its potential growth. For example, after the 3 Miles Island accident, no nuclear power plant was ordered in the US for almost 30 years, despite the fact that there were no casualties and that there were no significant radiation leaks outside the plant. The Hollywood movie, The China Syndrome, however, cashed in and did great business, while Jack Lemmon and Jane Fonda scared the wits out of the audience. Next, the Chernobyl incident of 1986 was again a bad advertisement for the nuclear energy industry and had even more consequences as the radiations did indeed spread outside the plant, creating considerable worldwide panic, particularly in Europe and the UK. Both these accidents are engraved in our collective memories as negative, iconic moments in nuclear energy history. Interestingly, at a personal level, I have witnessed the unfolding real life dramas of both the accidents up front. In 1979, at the time of the 3 Mile Island accident, I was doing a military training course in the US, and my wife and I remained glued to the television as the minute by minute details of the accident appeared dramatically on the television. In 1986, at the time of the Chernobyl accident, again we happened to be visiting the UK. Here again, the ball by ball account on the television of the radiation clouds and the fallout possibly moving towards the UK was followed by intense apprehension. I think we were unlucky not to be in Japan in 2011 at the time of the Fukushima disaster and missing out on a hat trick and all the excitement. Now, seriously, the accidents gave those who opposed nuclear energy a plausible narrative which they could use to make their point about the spread and long-term effect of radioactivity released in a nuclear accident. A UN report issued in 2011, which stated that there were 28 immediate deaths and a maximum of 15 deaths from thyroid cancer could be attributed to the accident, did not gain much publicity. However, the burning issue of climate change and the threat of rise in global temperature came to the rescue of nuclear energy. The nuclear industry had started to make some recovery when the Fukushima accident happened in 2011. This time, an external event, a tsunami, swept away the pumps of the emergency core cooling system, causing a core meltdown in three reactors. There was an economic burden, but no deaths resulting from the accident. However, public apprehensions about nuclear safety grew, and nuclear renaissance as a panacea became a casualty. Nuclear energy might have survived all of that in the wake of climate change threat had it not been for the fact that while the capital cost of nuclear energy kept climbing, the solar cells, which are also environment friendly, began getting cheaper by the day. The foregoing, however, is not the complete story. Nuclear energy also has some additional psychological strings attached to it. People in general cannot disassociate civil nuclear energy from the radiation fallouts of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It is because of the fear of radiation that nuclear security is as important an issue as nuclear safety. Equal attention must therefore be paid to nuclear security because there is this threat of radioactive releases in case of a terrorist activity from within or from outside a nuclear power plant. In this context, it is now internationally well recognized that Pakistan has taken stringent measures to put in place a professionally strong, state of the art nuclear security regime. The foregoing public apprehensions about nuclear energy have no doubt contributed to bringing down the share of nuclear energy, particularly in those developed countries where it all started. The global share of nuclear energy in electricity production, which had fast mounted to 17%, came down to 10%. And currently, not many startups are planned that could turn things around. The current war in Ukraine and the resultant gas crisis have combined to create another opportunity for nuclear energy. European countries are showing a tendency to return to nuclear energy so as to avoid the scary brownouts, winters without heat. However, nuclear power plants have long construction times and the turnaround cannot be swift. How far this potential nuclear renaissance will go and translate into a possible nuclear panacea will depend upon how the professionals and experts in the nuclear energy industry, as well as politicians and public interest leaders, will handle the situation. The nuclear industry, nevertheless, must take proactive and effective measures to get its rightful place in the global energy scenario. Now, in the light of what I have said in these opening remarks, I think that the topic chosen for session 4, that the nuclear panacea in a global perspective, is most pertinent and relevant. We have three very eminent experts who join me in this panel to express their views on various aspects of the topic. Dr. Anita Nilsson will take on nuclear energy cooperation, a tool for trust building and development. After having served at senior positions at the Swedish Nuclear Safety Authority, Dr. Nilsson joined the IAEA as Senior Coordinator for International Safeguards. In 2003, she was appointed Director of IAEA Nuclear Security Office, a position that she held until 2011. She was also the IAEA Gender Focal Point 2005 to 2009. And I think it was during this tenure of hers at the IAEA that I had the pleasure of meeting her at SPD Chaklala, Rawalpindi, to discuss a variety of issues related to her line of work. Presently, Dr. Nilsson is an independent consultant in global nuclear security infrastructure, excellence in the safe and secure use of nuclear applications for development, the deployment of advanced reactor technology, as well as radiation therapy. The second speaker on our panel on my right is Dr. Ansar Pervez, who will speak on nuclear power renaissance or another missed opportunity. Dr. Ansar Pervez is a former chairman of the Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission. In his various capacities in the PAEC, he has contributed to the development of human resource and application of nuclear technology in the areas of medicine and agriculture. He has played a pivotal role in the development of nuclear power in Pakistan. Dr. Ansar Pervez has a master's degree in physics and nuclear technology. He has earned his PhD in nuclear engineering and science from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, USA. He has been on the faculty of Purdue University, USA for 2 years. He was also elected as the chairman of the IAEA Board of Governors. Dr. Ansar has been awarded Pakistan's second highest award, Hilal-e-Imtiaz, for his outstanding and meritorious services. I have personally had the privilege of working closely with Dr. Ansar on Pakistan's classified and non-classified nuclear programs, particularly on Pakistan's Nuclear Energy Vision 2050 that I had mentioned earlier. Our third speaker on the panel is Dr. Happymon Jacob, who will speak on nuclear disarmament and the global order. He is joining us from St. Petersburg in Russia online, and I would like to welcome him as a member of our panel. Dr. Jacob is an internationally renowned scholar who is associate professor at the Center for International Politics, Organization and Disarmament, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Dr. Jacob teaches courses on disarmament and arms control diplomacy, India's foreign policy, India and disarmament, national security, and international relations. In his concurrent engagements, Dr. Jacob is a columnist with India's premier newspaper, The Hindu, host of weekly video show on national security on The Wire, founder, Council for Strategic and Defense Research, honorary director, the Chow Track, and an elected member of the Pugwash Council. Dr. Jacob's research specialization is in the areas of security studies, India-Pakistan relations, India's foreign and security policy, arms control and disarmament, and peace and conflict resolution. I've had the occasion of meeting Dr. Jacob in a Pugwash conference at Nagasaki in Japan in 2015. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll now invite Dr. Jacob first because I believe he is online. Is he?
Yes.
And that will change slightly the order of speakers. So please bring Dr. Jacob online. Okay, he's online. Welcome, Dr. Jacob. Over to you.
Thank you, General Kidwai, for that very kind introduction. Thank you, Dr. Mausuma Hassan, for this very kind invitation. May I first of all felicitate the renowned Pakistan Institute of International Affairs on its 75th anniversary. I must say that the Pakistan Horizon is a great publication that I read, and I'm very I've learned a lot from the in-house journal that they publish. I really apologize for my inability to be physically present in Karachi. As General Kidwai said, I'm joining you from St. Petersburg, where the temperature is actually -7 degrees. I wish I was there in the warmer weather of Karachi today. But I must say that given the current circumstances, being in Russia is not a bad deal, especially from a conflict management, conflict resolution perspective. In the few minutes that I have today, I wish to give you my take on the global environment in which we are discussing the issue of nuclear disarmament. Because I'm going to deal with, I've been asked to deal with the issue of nuclear disarmament. I sort of stick to that rather than getting into a lot of other issues that have been flagged ably so by General Kidwai. Let me begin by saying that I am much less optimistic today about nuclear disarmament than I was about, say, 20 years ago. I say that physically present in a region which appears to have sent the message to the rest of the world today that nuclear weapons may actually prevent major conventional wars. In fact, General Kidwai also referred to that in his initial remarks. So let me sort of begin by saying that nuclear disarmament, global nuclear disarmament can only happen when great powers so desire. And I have absolutely no hesitation to say that. They might look at India and Pakistan and smaller nuclear powers and say, you go to sort of disarm. But I think it has to begin elsewhere. Put differently, I think it is the structural conditions that shape disarmament efforts or even armament efforts, as it were. So let me sort of try and, in the manner I understand it, let me try and sort of explain those structural conditions governing the issue of nuclear disarmament / nuclear armament today. But before I do that, I think it is important for us to sort of, historically speaking, have a certain understanding about the historical narratives around the nuclear weapons which I think makes nuclear disarmament very unlikely today. For example, the shift from, it is important to note the shift of the narrative from genuine enthusiasm for nuclear disarmament in the 1950s and in the early 1960s to nuclear non-proliferation. Thereafter, you saw the NPT and all of those negotiations leading to the NPT. And then you had a lot of narrative around the issue of nuclear security. And today we are talking about potential nuclear use in the sort of European theater. So now we are not talking about, just to be clear, nuclear disarmament. We are not talking about nuclear non-proliferation. We are not even talking about nuclear security. We are talking about, all right, what do we do? Because there is the issue of a potential nuclear use. I think we've come a full circle in some ways, going back to 1945. That's unfortunately where we are. Now, let us not forget that this shift in the narrative from nuclear disarmament to all these phases and back to potential nuclear use today is also an attempt to buy the great powers to shift the goalpost as it suits the great powers. It has suited the great powers, historically speaking. I think one of the fundamental reasons why we have very little enthusiasm among a lot of countries, including India and Pakistan, perhaps, the non-nuclear weapon states as it under the NPT, for nuclear disarmament is because of the lack of progress on Article 6 of the NPT. Right, that the feeling that the nuclear weapon states have not done enough about Article 6, and that Article 6 is a ploy to get the non-nuclear weapon states to give up their attempts to make nuclear weapons, is something that is quite. Can you hear me? Because I can't see anyone on my screen. Right, I think I can now see you all. Fine. So I think this is a belief that is deeply entrenched in the non-nuclear weapon states, especially countries like ours. There has been very little progress on Article 6 of the NPT. The NPT, I mean, and I don't even want to talk about the NPT review conferences. That has hardly become a success story over the years. The focus on nuclear security has also actually taken a backseat. We haven't had a nuclear security summit, for example, since 2016. So the nuclear ban treaty, and of course we had the nuclear ban treaty itself, one could make the argument, was a success. But what is the future of the ban treaty? It is still in its infancy. The question is, will it take off? Now, in my humble opinion, the global geopolitical developments may have overtaken the success of the nuclear ban treaty. So that's probably why we are not hearing much about the ban treaty anymore in the news cycle today. So if I may sort of make a bold assertion, I would say that it seems that the current international environment is perhaps conducive for nuclear adventurism rather than nuclear disarmament. With little great power, concert on nuclear issues, and an international system in utter chaos, perhaps this is perhaps the most conducive atmosphere for building nuclear weapons. And that's unfortunate, but that's really, in my opinion, the reality. Indeed, I think there appears to be a new momentum towards nuclear armament, and certainly not nuclear disarmament. And General Kidwai also mentioned this, the realization about why Ukraine probably shouldn't have given up on nuclear weapons. I think this is something that strategists around the world in various countries are probably closely watching. I think this is also something that we should be watching quite carefully in our own region. There is a growing narrative in favor of nuclear weapons in some of the threshold states, be it South Korea or Japan for that matter, in of course, varying degrees. Let's take the example of South Korea, for example. There is some serious thinking happening in South Korea, in Seoul, on nuclear issues. The shrinking credibility of the American extended deterrence strategy, especially under the Trump administration, was a concern for the policymakers in South Korea. As Jeffrey Lewis, a nuclear strategist, asked recently, since the US has not managed to denuclearize North Korea, Is it now more likely to accept a nuclear South Korea? The Americans cannot make sure that there is no nuclear North Korea. Is it likely to accept a nuclear South Korea? I think that's a serious question now coming from Jeffrey Lewis. South Korea, for example, test fired the submarine-launched ballistic missile. So one could make the argument that it has the delivery vehicle and it has the technology to create warheads. So will it make a decision at some point of time to do that? Let's come to the question of Japan. It is not, of course, as close to, or let's say the nuclear debate in Japan is not as heightened as a pro-nuclear debate in South Korea. Japan may not develop nuclear weapons anytime soon. Polling actually suggests that the Japanese public remains steadfastly against the idea of Japan acquiring its own nuclear arsenal. But in the wake of in fact, former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said not too long ago that Japan should break a long-standing taboo and hold an active debate on nuclear weapons, including a possible nuclear sharing program similar to that of the NATO countries. Now, I think a lot of these arguments will pick up in the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, or as the Russians call it, the special military operation in Ukraine. Japan, remember, is not a party to the ban treaty, the nuclear ban treaty. Will Ukraine, the invasion of Ukraine, the Chinese and North Korean aggression change Japan's nuclear policy? Will a new Trump administration, one doesn't know what's going to happen in the United States in 2024, will a new Trump administration back or a nuclear umbrella for Japan or not? I think these are all open questions in many ways. Or will these countries, South Korea especially, develop nuclear weapons and not declare those nuclear weapons, like probably Israel has not declared its own nuclear weapons? Now, I think this very interesting point that General Kidwai pointed out in his opening remarks about, do weaker conventional powers have the incentive to denuclearize? I think that's a very, very interesting question. For example, the Indian situation, and he correctly pointed out the Pakistani situation about India versus how Pakistan looks at India to the east as a threat. How, for example, India looks at China as a threat. Even if China and India do not have nuclear weapons, will Indians be assured that there will be no conventional attack on India? So perhaps nuclear weapons function as an existential deterrence against a far superior conventional power, as it were. I think the lessons from Ukraine, again, will continue to inspire strategies in many countries around the world going forward. So this actually adds another layer to the complication around a potentially nuclear-free world. Now, I want to take a few more minutes to sort of, there is also some rethinking happening in Germany about nuclear energy. Of course, it is about nuclear energy and not about nuclear weapons. But I think this is important because it brings nuclear back into the focus. Or put differently, the post-Fukushima aversion to nuclear is a thing of the past today, because the Germans are rethinking about giving up on their nuclear reactors. But very quickly, nuclearization of the Asian region, North Korea's growing capability, the issue of JCPOA. So has the JCPOA train left the station as far as Iran is concerned? Is that deal renegotiable? If that doesn't get renegotiated in a new sort of geopolitical context, will Iran be tempted to sort of go nuclear? One doesn't know. Right? Will India, for example, feel the need to test thermonuclear weapons if Sino-Indian ties get worse? Remember, in 1998, India did test thermonuclear weapons, but by a lot of accounts, it wasn't done. Actually, Tellis, one of the influential writers on India's nuclear policy, recently said, and I quote, "Depending on where Sino-Indian relations go in future, India could feel the need to retest its thermonuclear weapons in order to deploy a powerful deterrent." So, what does all this mean? I think all of this in some ways means that disarmament has never been this distant as it does today. The unfortunate reality is that nuclear weapons are not going to go away. Unless there is a major nuclear crisis, we may not see any real progress towards disarmament. Like, for example, Fukushima led to a lack of investment in nuclear energy. So we may actually not see any change in the nuclear adventurism or armament enthusiasm unless until there is a crisis. So that's it. So what should we focus on? I think we should focus on the achievable without, of course, losing complete sight of the desirable. Achievable being or desirable being nuclear disarmament, as it were. So I would make the argument that we should focus on confidence building measures for stable deterrence, for the creation of stable deterrence, rather than worrying about nuclear disarmament, which I think is not going to happen anytime soon. So demating, de-alerting of weapons, increasing salience of nuclear weapons in national security strategies, for example, focusing on deterrent weapons than, say, for example, TNWs, or push for a global NFU pledge, including by the Americans, for example. The United States does not have a NFU pledge. So I think these are some of the things that one should focus on. Focus on, for example, nuclear security measures to ensure there is no nuclear terrorism. And I think there should be more cooperation between like-minded countries in our own region. There should be more attempt at creating nuclear responsibility. I'll finish it in exactly 1 minute, General Kidwai. I know you're looking at the time. So I think the India-Pakistan conversation on nuclear CBMs must continue. If I'm not mistaken, we haven't had that conversation in about 9 years, which is a pity, in my opinion. And I will also make the argument, go one step further and make the argument that we should not just focus on nuclear weapons. We should focus on conflicts, because you have nuclear weapons, you have weaponization, because there are conflicts. So focusing only on weapons is a limited and partial approach. The good news, in many ways, historically speaking, is that there is an eventual obsolescence of great power wars in the 21st century. This could percolate into local settings too. The bad news is that there is still a lot of conflicts in the international system today. But I think I am quite clear in my mind that a narrow focus on nuclear disarmament is a fool's errand. We'll have to look at it in a more achievable manner rather than sort of coming at it from a desirable sense of the term. So, do I like nuclear disarmament? Yes. Do I want it now? I'm not so sure. I think I'll leave it at that. General Kidwai, thank you so much for the time.
Thank you very much. Should we have a Q&A with him first, or would he'll stay with us till the end? Okay. Dr. Nilsson?
Yeah.
Just to remind you, she'll be talking about nuclear energy cooperation, a tool for trust building and development.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to express my warm congratulations to the 75 years anniversary. I am very grateful and proud to have been receiving an invitation to come to you and speak at this very important conference. And I would also like to express that I'm so glad to have learned, got to know Dr. Masuma Hassan, and I am so impressed by her achievements and the fact that I have been able to participate here. So thank you very much. I am going to present to you my thoughts around nuclear energy cooperation as a tool for trust building and development. Over the years, I have also seen significant changes that have taken place in Pakistan, obviously in general, but also in specific areas. I will specifically address the substantial developments that have taken place in the nuclear sector, and I want to speak about how these achievements in the peaceful uses of nuclear energy can show a way forward. As the IAEA director, I had the privilege to interact with Pakistan, the operating organizations and the regulatory body PNRA, and to see firsthand its efforts to establish the infrastructure required to implement and control a nuclear technical measures to support it. As a result, a lot of experience and knowledge has been built up over half a century. Other countries are now taking the first steps to introduce nuclear energy in their energy mix, creating the infrastructure, establishing the technical knowledge and practical know-how to start implementing a peaceful nuclear program. At the IAEA, I could also observe how important it is for inexperienced countries or organizations to have colleagues or partner countries to turn to for support in complex situations. Pakistan, with its experience and knowledge, may help newcomers to address the questions that are so key for the success of their initiatives. I strongly believe that such interaction, also at several levels, not only operator by operator, but at all the levels, will build trust and bridges between countries and cultures. Presently, 32 countries operate nuclear power. This contributes about 10% of the world's electricity, which is not insignificant as a non-fossil contributor to electrical power. Affordable, clean energy for all is intended and identified as the seventh goal in the UN list of Sustainable Development Goals. Now, for the first time in 20 years, the number of people living without access to electricity is again growing and reaching just below 775 million. This unbelievable number of people are living without electricity. Projections indicate also that the need for electricity towards mid-century will grow by some 50 to 70%. If only half or up to 70% of that electricity is to be delivered from fossil-free sources, we stand in front of a drastic transition from fossil to non-fossil generated electricity. The challenges are formidable. We have heard about it before today, but it can be expressed again. First, the growing global population with an expanding infrastructure to support and feed that growing population. Second, the industry is also required to transfer to fossil-free energy, to fossil-free electricity and power at large. And it should come from either renewable sources, hydro, nuclear, or other sources. There is no doubt in my mind that all these energy sources will be needed. And there is also no doubt that there is no one-size-fits-all. It's rather the opposite, that the mix has to be selected by the individual countries. Having said that, I would also like to underline that nuclear power may provide a fair share of the base load that can be turned on and turned off as required. But the nuclear power option is unevenly used in different regions of the world. So while there are 150 about operating reactors in Asia, a bit less in North America, only 2 reactors are operating in Africa and 5 in South America. So there is room for more, in particular in this situation where we have the threats of climate change and fossil fuel. There is also expansion in the production of nuclear generated electricity, although one can say modest. In 2021 and 2022, 7 countries connected new reactor units to the grid. Among them was Pakistan, with the Karachi reactor 2 and 3. It was impressive to learn, to read, and note that K3 was constructed and taken in operation in 6 years, which is much quicker than normally referred to. The IAEA reports that 30 other countries, so-called nuclear newcomer countries, are seriously planning and preparing for the inclusion of nuclear power in their energy mix. Without doubt, significant efforts will be needed to provide a reliable and effective infrastructure for nuclear power production in these newcomer countries. The IAEA has published a milestones document that the newcomer country has to observe to become nuclear competent. The regulatory system must have a level which can handle all matters associated with nuclear power. The human resources required, the operation of nuclear power plants, the required material and equipment to support the units, and then finally also the nuclear material that is needed for the fuel production and management. Historically, countries embarking on a nuclear program also invested a lot of interest and effort in its development. That is shown very clearly by the Western dominance so far, those that were having a broader research and development interest. This may no longer be the case. Countries may be less interested in the research and development of the technology and more interested in the delivery of significant quantities of electricity. This may be a new situation, but of fundamental reason for countries and organizations to join forces in establishing and maintaining the knowledge and skill that undoubtedly is necessary to run a peaceful program. Also here, I think that Pakistan may be helpful in this regard because it has a mature regulatory system, it has several reactor units in operation, it has one or more centers of excellence, and considerable technical know-how. The introduction of nuclear power in a country without prior nuclear experience is a process that involves several sectors of the civil society. Countries in need of such assistance will be grateful for a partner for long-term cooperation and interaction. And I say that because it's different from an ad hoc piece of assistance, the long-term partnership. The IAEA milestones process would become more effective if newcomers partner up with the experienced countries. And as I mentioned before, Pakistan may be very helpful in this regard. Nuclear technology stands in the beginning of a period of major development. While presently LWRs, the light water reactors, dominate, there is advanced technology around the corner. It uses other cooling systems, it has other safety arrangements, it has other chemical forms, physical forms of fuel. And advanced technologies may be used in large reactors or it may be used in small reactors, SMRs. There is a forecast that these SMRs may be deployed in remote areas, in single units or in many units. In other words, exposing a freedom of choice which has not been the case before. Also here, there is a possibility to point to the experience and knowledge and actually the development phase of it all that could be helpful if Pakistan engage actively in this process, both, of course, at home, but then also internationally. So our civil society not only depends on nuclear energy, it also depends on the civil uses of radioactive sources, which is part of the package seen in a broader perspective. Obviously for cancer treatment in the medical applications and medical diagnostics, but there are others. The oil industry are known to have used radioactive sources extensively, and for other industrial purposes, and of course in R&D. But there are also some concerns about the security of radioactive sources, and that has resulted in occasions of denial of shipments. It has been more difficult to ship sources around for exchange of disused ones. There is also a lack of proper management possibilities for the waste. So the substances, the sources that are out of use, sometimes sits in storages and without the proper taken care of. And for some reasons it is felt that radioactive sources should be taken care of nationally, not in regional storages or not at an international level. I would like to challenge that and say that this is another area in which we could benefit all of us, from solutions that are coming on a higher level, perhaps in a regional context or even in an international context, because the solution is waiting for an answer. Peaceful uses of nuclear material is normally covered by safeguards agreement with the IAEA. When there are no deviations from the agreements, the IAEA issues statements that the material has stayed in peaceful uses. These statements are fundamental for continued uses, for example, in nuclear power. And a management culture that builds on interaction between governments and operators and with the public definitely is benefited from having these kinds of statements that are actually telling what the material has been used for and in compliance with the agreements. That is an introduction to the last section that I will talk about a little bit here, and that is the military use. 5 countries are recognized as nuclear weapon states in the non-proliferation treaty. India and Pakistan selected not to become party to the NPT and has developed their nuclear programs outside of NPT and therefore is not included in the number 5. I say this because the coming sector dealing with NPT, in simple words, is a treaty of give and take. Abstention from nuclear weapons is balanced by giving non-nuclear weapon states access to nuclear technology, Article 6, as was referred to earlier. The continued status of the 5 nuclear weapon states is balanced by a commitment to disarm. Many countries are disappointed by the lack of progress in this regard, and this disappointment, together with other reasons, may have been reasons why recent NPT review conference and earlier ones have been ended without a concluding paper. And tension is increasing in Asia and Europe. The potential use of weapons, including tactical or battlefield armory, has not been completely ruled out, rather referred to as possible. This has not made me think that the peaceful uses are less important. I think rather the opposite. The opportunity of making as much use of peaceful uses of nuclear material, radioactive sources, etc., I really find as a possibility to build bridges, to create trust between countries. And also here, there is a step forward that could help in this regard and help the future role of Pakistan. It would certainly be strengthened if there is a separation between its peaceful programs from the activities that are military. Such a separation could bring clarity and be beneficial in increased circumstances internationally in the nuclear energy sector and with the newcomer countries. So in concluding, I would again stress that peaceful nuclear energy, which appears so important in the climate perspective now and in the sustainable development goals that the UN has established, can be a most effective tool to combat these shortcomings. Open doors for development and for reaching the goals, at the same time reducing tension and building trust between countries that otherwise would not be interacting constructively. And I would say that that can be a contribution to a changing global order. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you, Dr. Nilsson. I think you made an excellent case for the topic that you chose, nuclear energy cooperation, a tool for trust building and development. I'll have more to say on this in my conclusions. And I'll now invite the third speaker, Dr. Ansar Pervez, whose subtopic is nuclear power, renaissance, or another missed opportunity.
Because basically I'm a teacher, I prefer to talk standing despite my one leg broken. and it's also not nice to be the last speaker of the day. And I showed you that more than anybody else, I want this thing to be over, and I shall not speak maybe more than 45 minutes. And I must thank here Dr. Masuma Hassan and PIIA to provide me an opportunity to talk to all these people, distinguished guests, on a subject in which I have been very deeply involved in a number of ways. And as a matter of fact, my age is almost the same as that of Pakistan, or as that of PIIA, or as the story of nuclear power industry in the world. We are almost together and will remain so as long as I'm alive. So I think maybe we can start. So basically, when we talk of nuclear technology, and I'll at one or two places here, I'll be a little bit very elementary, because I can see a lot of young people sitting there. So the senior ones, the older ones, may please bear with me. But when we talk of nuclear technology, actually nuclear technology is associated, nuclear radiations are associated with nuclear technology because they come out of the nucleus. And of course, we have nuclear fission that we talk a lot about, and nuclear fusion. Nuclear fission and nuclear fusion are similar, except for the fact that in one case the nucleus breaks up to produce energy, and in the second case the nuclei combine to produce energy. But nuclear radiations which come out of the nuclei and are called radioactive radiations, radioactive nuclei, they have this property that they can change the cell structure and they can penetrate through things just like the X-ray. And because of this, they have multiple applications. And one of them, as was also talked about by Dr. Anita Nilsson, is the application in the sector of medicine, because if you can see inside the body, you can treat it, you can diagnose what it is, and then if you can kill the cell, you can also treat the patient. In Pakistan, already we have 19 medical centers, and in the world, we have around 10,000 medical centers which make of nuclear radiation. And the reason I wanted to put this slide up, and the reason I wanted to say this thing, is because a lot of time when we hear the word nuclear, we mean either it's a bomb or it's a nuclear power plant. But actually, nuclear is a lot more to it as far as the peaceful application is concerned. And one of them is the application in the medical center. In our own medical centers, we treat more than 1 million patients per year, and we think that we take 70% of the load of the country. And because of these two properties that I said, that is the property, the capability to penetrate, and the capability to interact with the cells and change the structure, a lot of things can be done. In agriculture, you can create new variety. Food preservation, you can kill the bacteria growth and delay the food ripening necessary for export. Security, you can see inside things, boxes and containers. Dr. Anita knows about this much more than anybody else. In industry, you can do non-destructive testing in gauges. And in water management, of course, you can track water underground and you can know what is happening under the soil. So in Pakistan, as far as Atomic Energy Commission is concerned, we are tackling all of these things with different levels, at different levels. And I'm not going to spend much time on nuclear fusion, although every now and then we read about it that nuclear fusion is going to become a possibility. Yes, it has been demonstrated in the lab that nuclear fusion can take place. It has been demonstrated in the lab that more energy is produced in a nuclear fusion that was consumed in spending it. But this is only the proof of the principle. As far as the commercial application of this thing is concerned, I don't think that it is going to happen very soon. And even if it does, it will be very, very expensive. That is what things appear at this point in time, unless there is a technological breakthrough. So my focus, therefore, in this presentation would then be on nuclear fission. And as was also pointed out by the chair, that nuclear power started early on, and there were so many. As a matter of fact, he has given you a good overview of the entire nuclear history, as a matter of fact, I would say, at the global level. And I would only substantiate what he said by showing you some graphs and pictures and data, so that we can understand as to how the situation is. and what possible role nuclear can or cannot play. The first thing that when nuclear started, and as a matter of fact, this was almost after this Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and after that, President Eisenhower made an announcement in the United Nations that we are going to set up a body to with what he called Atom for Peace Plan. And under that peace plan, nuclear power plants for civil use, they started coming up. And at that time, the chairman of the United States Atomic Energy Commission, I think Lewis Strauss was his name, he said that nuclear would be too cheap to meter. But over a period of 30, 40, 50, 60 years, nuclear has turned from too cheap to meter, to too expensive to install. And this is what the chair also said. This is what happened. And as you can see here, प्लीज थोड़ा सा पीछे जरा शोर ना करें इतना. मैंने आपको बताया ना मैं टीचर हूँ तो मैं क्लास में साइलेंस भी रखना चाहता हूँ. अच्छा, ये जो है एज यू कैन सी हियर द न्यूक्लियर power plants, this is connection to the grid, this is historical data. The nuclear power plants were coming up, started, reached a peak, and when this accident took place in 1979, the construction of the nuclear power plants dropped. So this is what the situation is if you look at it. And then again in around 2000, about 14 years after this Chernobyl accident, there is what is termed as nuclear renaissance, because some countries thought that okay, these two accidents took place, but anyway we now have developed our technology, we have added many design features, we have trained our people much better than before, and therefore no such thing would happen, and therefore we can start building nuclear power plants. And some nuclear power plants did come up as a result of this. But then Fukushima took place in 2011, and the constructions again went down. So there was one renaissance here which actually did not materialize because of Fukushima. And as I've shown you here, this is because of this, the total energy produced by nuclear power in the world has remained almost static for the last 20 years, which means that there is no increase in the nuclear energy produced. And since the overall energy is increasing, it is only 10% of the total as compared to the 17% that it were at one time. And actually the situation is even worse than that. If you look at that, this is the age of the nuclear power plants. Most of the nuclear power plants are in this region, aged between 30 and 40. They are not going to last long, maybe 15 years, maybe 10 years, maybe 20 years. And when these will be gone, there will be no nuclear power in this magnitude of this volume of nuclear power will be gone, and there isn't much coming behind. The number of plants is very low. So 15 years, 20 years from now, you will be having a situation like this, and this peak will have disappeared. And why this is happening, or in other words, the challenges that nuclear faces today. And I think it is important to understand, because if we are talking of this subject, we should know all these things. First of all is the fear of nuclear radiations. So as I just said, nuclear radiations can treat, they can also harm you. And the thing is that since the nuclear radiations are invisible, and since their effect can be delayed, a common man is really worried. He does not know whether the nuclear radiations exist here or they do not exist here. And this is something that nuclear industry should have taken care of to tell the people or to keep them informed. Then, of course, there is a lack of public confidence in nuclear safety, although many design features have been added. And if you compare the type of reactor that we have now and the type of reactors in which the accidents took place, it will be like comparing your iPhone, your cell phone today with the rotor telephones that you had about 30, 40 years ago. There's a lot of changes, but somehow people or public in general have not been made aware of that. And then the spent fuel disposal issue. The nuclear industry has so far not been able to decide as to how they are going to dispose of the spent fuel. They are looking for an ideal solution, that is, they will take it and bury it in some geological sites where this thing will never appear again. Although the total quantity of nuclear fuel is very small, and you can probably store it, long-term storage or whatever, and then continue with that. And similarly, the high capital cost of nuclear, the long construction times are also making a difference. The role of politics, because in Europe and many some other countries, a political party comes because they have been voted into power because people do not want nuclear, and therefore they will say that we cannot support nuclear power. Proliferation concerns, of course, non-availability of qualified manpower. And I think this is a very important point to understand. Right now, if someone places out of 20 nuclear power plants with Westinghouse, can they build it? They cannot. All their people are now gone, dead in the hospital, and they don't exist. And more importantly, when there is nuclear power industry is not growing, the smart and talented people all over the world may not come there. They may not want to join nuclear industry. Therefore, there will always be a problem when the real renaissance begins. And then, of course, the growth of renewable and solar is a big competition. And in spite of the well-known facts, why all of this happening, in spite of the fact that nuclear power is a base load electricity option that provides energy security, nuclear is environment friendly, it does not pose any threat to climate, nuclear fuel is not prone to price fluctuations and or supply problems as Europe is facing these days because of this Ukraine war. And the quantity of spent fuel is very small. All the fuel that has been produced as spent fuel in the world, I think about 4 or 5 years ago, IAEA made a study of that, could be placed inside a football field with a few story highs. That's all. That is the total quantity of spent fuel. And of course, this low cost, of course, makes it economically attractive, even though the capital cost is high. And this state of nuclear exists in spite of the fact that a large percentage of coal, gas, and oil cannot be consumed if the climate change conditions are to be met, if the temperature has to be maintained below the acceptable levels. And in spite of the facts that the deaths, and I would like to read that out, deaths resulting, premature deaths per year caused by air pollution from burning fossil fuels run into millions. Almost 4 to 6 million persons die prematurely because of this environment pollution caused by this. Whereas in a car, 1 liter of petrol, you produce 2.5 kilogram of CO2, which goes into it. And 1 ton of coal, 2.5 tons of CO2. And in spite of all of that, and in spite of the fact we are talking about climate change, and in spite of the fact that many countries have said that they will not build any coal-fired power plants, the total number of coal-fired plants being built these days far exceeds the megawatts of nuclear. 3 times. This is already installed capacity, and this is the nuclear power, this is the coal-fired plant which is being built. And as a matter of fact, I've just read, during the first 6 months of 2022, 17% more energy have been produced by coal than in the preceding year because of the Ukraine war. Because many countries in Europe, and Germany included, had to go back to coal to meet their energy requirement. I think we're just getting to the... So renewables, I think, is very important to mention. They are actually being considered as something that would ultimately be the source of electricity for the world. Whether or not they will be able to become the baseload electricity supplier depends upon how the storage facility can be created and how economical that can be. But this is something that can be debated. So coupled with nuclear power, I carried out a Google search, and it says nuclear renaissance 336,000 times, which means there is a lot of talk of nuclear. But what is happening in terms of nuclear these days, that Germany and Belgium, who had decided to cut out all their nuclear power plants, have decided to hold their decision for some time, and they are continuing to operate the power plants which are operating. France, of course, has decided to now build more. Japan, after Fukushima accident, one accident took place because of this tsunami, and they shut down their 54 plants. And after 10 years, they have started 10 of these plants. Turkey, Bangladesh, and Poland are constructing their first plant. China, India, Pakistan, and Russia are continuing with their nuclear power programs. Things that can help build any nuclear renaissance is I think the most important thing, you can do whatever design changes you make, that's fine. But unless you can, and I'm talking more specifically about America and Europe and these developed countries, mass communication is very important. And developing an approach to public confidence in the safety of nuclear power plants, taking measures to help decrease the capital costs, standardizing the design and construction of nuclear power plants, and including private sector as much as possible. I mean, these are few measures that should be taken and can, if you want the nuclear to regain the status that it should. And having said this, I'll just finish by showing as to what is happening. Canop, the first nuclear power plant that Pakistan had. Pakistan was the 15th country in the world, and this when nuclear power plant, this Canop was built with Chinese assistance. And we have two nuclear power plants operating in Karachi, also built with Chinese assistance. These are 1100 megawatt, and these are generation three plants. And this is the state of affairs as far as the capacity factor of these plants is concerned. Almost 80% for all of them. And that's a very good capacity factor for nuclear power plants. If you can get something like 80%, this means you're doing a very good job. So nuclear power is doing a good job. They are only maybe 8% of the total installed capacity, but they're producing close to 14 and 50% in terms of energy generation. So I think in summary, what I just said is, and as a matter of fact, I said before that there's a lot of things that can be said and talked about, and a lot of argument that can be made. Number one, unless public confidence can be restored in nuclear, unless public is sure, nuclear power plant in all likelihood may not go very far. There is, you can call a short-term renaissance. There is a tendency maybe these days to talk about nuclear because of the climate change effect and because of this Ukrainian war, which has become an immediate cause of getting some lease of life for nuclear. But unless there is a public confidence, unless the capital costs of nuclear can be decreased, I don't think that nuclear can really get the kind of status that it should. And well, of course, the other alternative which people are seeing these days is solar and wind, which is renewable. And of course, it will take its place. But as they say, energy, you should not put all your eggs in the same basket. It is not wise, it is not prudent anywhere to use the same source of energy for your entire country. Sometimes that can lead to a lot of problems. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Dr. Ansar. I think you made a great case, but is it renaissance or is it a missed opportunity? I'm still not quite sure. I hope it will lead to a renaissance because we need every single source to provide energy to this energy-starved world, particularly in Pakistan. Now we have time for the questions and answers. Very few. Okay, you control the timing. Is the third speaker online? Jacob? No. Anyway, we have two speakers and you have me. Three are available for questions. He's here. Okay, all four of us are available for questions.
Sorry. Allow me to speak, if I can, ask a question to Dr. Jacob. I would like to pick up from where he has left. That was the question of coming to full circle related to the use of nuclear weapons. As history teaches us that mankind, whenever they have built weapons, they have used it under one pretext or the other. At the height of the Cold War, in the 1989, I believe, Soviets had more than 60,000 nuclear weapons. Americans, 58,000 nuclear weapons. I think there was one more country which had also made 10 weapons. And I think history has forgotten about it. It's South Africa. As you mentioned, there are two more players may come up very soon. We have, as of now, maybe weapons in storage, in parts, in disassembled form, in complete systems. There might be somewhat like 1,75,000 nuclear weapons available. And the future is very bleak. So my question is it is going to be ultimately a World War III, all this weapon to be used, and after that only we will come to disarmament?
Dr. Jacob?
Thank you.
Thank you for that very provocative question. It's an interesting one. Let me put it this way. I am not that pessimistic about our ability to manage some of these weapon systems or technologies as it were. So, for a very long time in the NWS countries, the nuclear weapon states, the thinking about India and Pakistan particularly was that these guys are not very responsible when it comes to nuclear technology and nuclear weapons, so they should not be allowed to create nuclear weapons. That was the thinking. But we have proven them wrong. We've been very, if anything, extremely careful about our nuclear technology, our nuclear weapons. Today, the very people who accused the developing countries like ours of nuclear responsibility are perhaps bordering on nuclear responsibility themselves. So having said that, I think there was a great deal of genuine enthusiasm for nuclear disarmament in our part of the world, certainly in India in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and even in at least parts of the 1980s. There was genuine enthusiasm in India for nuclear disarmament, but we were very clear that the nuclear disarmament could not have been discriminatory. It is not the case as if some states hold these weapons, the others do not. That kind of discriminatory treatment was not accepted. And the global and the N5 was simply not willing to take that logic. And today, we are nuclear weapon states, even if not under the ambit of the NPT. So the only logical path forward that I can see is more nuclear responsibility by all states in the international system, addressing deeper conflicts and root causes, and having more nuclear conversations around CBMs and no first use and issues of that kind. Very long time. And we are neighbors, so there is every necessity for us to get into that broad-based conversation around nuclear issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jacob. I think I would like to add to what he has said, because the two questions, the first one about disarmament and the despondency about the disarmament, and your question about the possible restraint, I think they are interconnected and they need to be seen in a larger context. Of course, there is the global issues of arms control and disarmament, which are way beyond the South Asian South Asian dialogue. But talking specifically of our area, South Asia, India and Pakistan, Dr. Jacob has referred to the Lahore Declaration way back in the 90s after the nuclear tests. The point is that dialogue, of course, you have referred to CBMs as one possible way of easing tensions. While nuclear weapons can't be wished away, they are a reality of life in the power that hold them, and the reality of life in India and Pakistan is that both countries are nuclear. The point is that there has to be a management mechanism, a restraint mechanism, which can come only through dialogues. And in this context, it is unfortunate that the process of dialogue has not taken off really between India and Pakistan. And the nuclear segment of that dialogue, which was originally conceived as an 8-point dialogue for the Lahore Declaration, the nuclear segment was one segment within the peace and security point. And within that, there was a proposal by Pakistan, which we have been referring to as the strategic restraint regime, to be specific to the word that you have used. And that strategic restraint regime was exactly the kind of proposal which included broadly three proposals under the rubric of conventional restraints, nuclear restraints, and missile restraints. And within these three larger points of the restraint, there were 7 or 8 other points that needed to be built upon and discussed. Unfortunately, because of the larger political disconnect between India and Pakistan, this dialogue has never taken off. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't need to be undertaken. As and when a political opportunity is provided at the political strategic level, I think this dialogue must take place in the interest of security and safety of the nuclear weapons within the South Asian regime. So that's what I thought I'll add to what Dr. Jacob has said. Next, please.
I have a couple of quick questions. I've been following the literature on the use of nuclear energy as an alternative source for energy. But there's enormous hesitancy in the circles that debate these issues, enormous hesitancy to pursue the nuclear option. The focus is very much on solar. Solar is more feasible, solar is more replicable, etc. And therefore, there must be a good reason why there is hesitancy in international circles to use the nuclear option for energy source. And it'd be great to hear from the speakers what they think about that concern. My second quick question is that
Can I take on your first question first?
it's a very quick one.
Okay.
So, I agree. The nuclear, if those countries who have nuclear weapons, perhaps the war is frozen. But my question is, does the peace also get frozen? Because you overestimate your strength because you have the nuclear weapon? I think this is something we should think about a little bit.
Thank you. Would you like to take on the first question?
Not working. No, now you can hear me. All right. So I'd like to comment on the nuclear option in two ways. It is correct what was presented here earlier, that there has been almost like a curse for the nuclear power option. It's this problem or that problem, and then something happens, and it is fuel for the discussion and fuel for the anxiety of radiation because of it being invisible. You can't smell it, you can't feel it, etc., etc. You have heard all of this. But at the same time, now these days, with the energy crisis in Europe, which it is an energy crisis because it is felt in the wallets. Prices have gone up tenfold in some cases. And even in my country, Sweden, this has been noticed very, very clearly. And as for public opinion, it is correct that the public opinion in Sweden went down, bottom low, after the Harrisburg accident. And it triggered a referendum about the nuclear power option and the phase out of nuclear power after some time. That has not really been implemented, that referendum. And it is possible to see in public opinion polls that slowly, even before this year, the positive interest towards nuclear power has gone up. And now, let's hope that there are no new accidents, but now there is definitely in favor in the country, to the point that in the recent election, the parties that challenged the government put up as one of the front issues that the energy crisis, the electricity crisis, the unstable situation with industry that cannot get enough power for their production must change. and they went to election on a proposal to immediately expand the nuclear program, and with lots of criticism to earlier governments that has actually halved the nuclear program from 12 units to 6 units. So now we shall see if this is possible to fix in time for the public not to forget what the discussion has been before, and to get the construction in place. And the main argument against nuclear is that it takes too long. We need something quicker, and the quick option is wind. But if you ask a landowner about how the landowner wants to use the soil, the landowner does not want to use the soil for big blocks of concrete, because it destroys the soil for a very, very long time period. So things are changing there. We have reports also from Germany that this past decision of phasing out has become unpopular. And there was a decision recently to expand the operating period for 1 or 2 of their reactors for another 3 months, which is of course tiny, nothing. But at the same time, it is an almost unthinkable decision if you count a couple of years back. So one should not be too discouraged by public opinion. But I think the other side of this is that it is necessary to take it on, to provide the information, stand steady, never hesitate to take the discussion, provide the facts and figures, and make sure they are correct. Because incorrect facts and figures are, of course, very, very bad in such a situation. We have seen it domestically, and I think it can be achieved elsewhere also. So not that negative a conclusion, but of course, we shall see, simply.
Thank you, Dr. Nilsson. I think Dr. Ansar wants to add a few words.
Actually, I think it's a good question that you asked, and I can maybe say a few things that I did not when I was talking. If I put them in order of importance or decreasing importance, in my opinion, the reason nuclear is not getting its due place in energy market is, number one, because of low public acceptance because of fear of radiations. And my contention is that the nuclear industry has failed to make its point to the public. For example, may I request a video that I gave, this 10-15 seconds with you? Can you display that? The thing is, the low level radiations do not affect us at all harmfully. We live here all the time, we are exposed to radiation. We're sitting here and we are being exposed to radiation. I'll take a flight home back to Islamabad and I'll be exposed to extra radiations. And there are some countries in the world, some locations where the background radiations is 10, 20, 30 times higher than what I'm getting here. There is one place, Kerala in India, Ramsar, I think in Iran, where the radiation level, background radiations are very high. But life is very normal. So nuclear industry did not propagate that. They did not spend enough money on doing research and development work on seeing that the low level radiations do not affect you. And they simply concede to the data which is provided by those who actually oppose nuclear. And also, I think nuclear industry made a very tall claim to begin with that nuclear accident will not take place. Instead, they should have said that nuclear accident may take place, but we know how to manage it. We know how to control it, and then public would not be affected. Had they made that statement at the beginning, TMI accident takes place, nothing happens. Nuclear industry comes out with flying colors rather than facing a failure. So this is the point, I think, with regard to nuclear public acceptance. Nuclear industry has to do them. Play कर सकते हैं वीडियो? Please जरा वीडियो play करें. 10 सेकंड का वीडियो है, लेकिन it's very important.
इस वीडियो से कितनी रेडिएशन मिलेगी आपको?
दोबारा चलाएं अगर चला सकते हैं तो रिप्ले कर. देखिए, द पॉइंट इज This is a radioactive source. It comes close to a detector and the detector beeps. This detector is available on Amazon for something between $20 to $30. The question is, why does this detector not exist in people's home like the temperature detectors, which they tell them the temperature, which they tell them how what is the wind velocity this time, or what is the pressure or anything. And this is something that nuclear industry could have done. They invest money on it, make it cheaper, make it $5 a piece, make it even cheaper, invest money on it, and everyone has it. Develop people's confidence in it, nothing is happening. You're sitting next to a power plant. If you live next to the walls of a nuclear power plant, the dose that you get is the same as you get by traveling from here to Islamabad and back. That's all. But we cannot make this case. We have not been able to make this case with the people, and you have to give them demos like this. You have to give them the data. Okay, take this. If there's a radioactive emission around you, you will be the first place to know. And now what is really hurting nuclear industry, in addition to these two, is the very high capital cost. The capital cost is increasing because they're adding more and more equipment to it, double wall containment, there's new systems, new heat exchangers, new pumps. All of this is adding to the cost without actually developing the public confidence. And most importantly, one thing which nuclear industry must take care of is that when it started off in its own merit. People thought that this is the best source of energy, no pollution, no environmental effect, very cheap, very reliable, very economical, and everything. And now whatever the renaissance is, whatever the survival is based on demerits of other things, like Ukrainian war. This would be a very temporary effect. Once this war comes to an end, people will go back to what they, unless you can change their thinking.
Okay, thank you very much. I think your question has been answered in considerable detail. The first, could you kindly repeat the second question?
Nuclear weapons, they freeze.
Yeah, mic.
My second question was, nuclear weapons may freeze war because, you're too scared.
Nuclear weapons might?
Freeze war.
Freeze war, but they do not resolve any issue.
No, absolutely right. I agree with you. Understood you correctly. Nuclear weapons do not resolve conflicts. Conflict has to be resolved on the table. No conflict can be resolved by a nuclear weapon. I think only one conflict was resolved, and that was Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But that was a very twisted situation, a very unique situation. It's not even worth referring to. But otherwise, in today's modern world, with 8 or 9 nuclear powers in the world, nuclear weapons are, as we all understand, I think, these are weapons of deterrence of aggression. They stop aggression, or they prevent aggression from happening, or at least they are supposed to deter war, but they are not the answer to resolution of conflicts, whether it's Kashmir, whether it is Palestine, whether it is Ukraine, you name it. Any conflict has to be resolved on the table at the end of the day. No weapons will resolve it. Even weapons will not resolve it permanently. There are any number of examples when one conflict resolved because of weapons came up again 20 years later. World War II came up because of World War I. And you never know, the World War II issues have still not been resolved, how they are coming up again in different forms. So I can only say that I agree with you that nuclear weapons do not resolve conflicts. They stop wars from breaking out perhaps, but they will never resolve conflicts, not an answer to conflict resolutions. Do we have time for one more question? One last question.
My suggestion and comment basically that when the concept of a nuclear weapon.
Mike, please, sir.
However, the nuclear aspect has been used successfully and beneficially for the mankind in terms of healthcare, basically. But unfortunately, the regulations that have been put forward in terms of usage of nuclear energy, in terms of the X-rays and radiology, that has to be very closely monitored in terms of the licensing that has been issued, in terms of the regulation of those institutions. So my question is, how far PNRA is basically working towards it? This is my question. Thank you.
If you are saying that the PNR is over-regulating things or what? No, PNR is not under-regulating. The thing is, PNRA is regulating nuclear power plants. They are regulating all the activities that Atomic Commission does, and that is fine. As far as the X-ray machines are concerned, the thing is that they have, I think, more than 5,000 X-ray machines already. I do not belong to PNR. They already have more than 5,000 machines on which their inspectors go and which follow all the regulations. But the problem in our country is that there are machines at very small places, and if you put them and ask them to do everything that needs to be done, then this becomes an unattractive business for them, and it becomes too expensive for them to maintain that in smaller places. And then there is also resentment among the people. They say there is an X-ray machine working here and we could get our X-ray. Now in the realm of regulation, they have shut this shop down. And what shall we do? Where do we go? We travel 200 kilometers to another big city and get our X-ray. So there are problems. But this is not the end of it. I mean, they are continually increasing the number of X-ray machines which are under their regulations. And of course, as far as nuclear power plants is concerned, Canop, when it completed 30 years of its design life, it remained shut down for full 2 years because PNRA did not allow it the renewal of license.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I think it's been an interesting session, and we heard three very eminent speakers, Dr. Anita Nilsson, Dr. Ansar Pervez, and from St. Petersburg, Dr. Happymon Jacob. They spoke on three different aspects of the subject where the nuclear is Panacea. I'm not sure whether we have found that answer or not at the end of these discussions that have taken place. But I would like to repeat what I had said in my opening remarks, that as far as Pakistan is concerned, on the military side, I think certainly, and on the energy side, partially, I think the nuclear capabilities in both civil applications and military applications have been an answer to many of our dilemmas on the strategic side and on the energy side. Dr. Jacob took a very comprehensive view of nuclear disarmament in the areas of various regions, specifically Far East, where he talked of North South Korea, Japan, China, and of South Asia, where he talked of India and Pakistan. The one thing that I would like to highlight is, which he said, Dr. Jacob also said, that nuclear weapons are a reality of life and they are not going away. They are here to stay. NPT or no NPT, membership or no membership, nuclear weapons are a reality of life. They have been there since 1945, and they will continue to be there for the any number of decades that you can think of. And therefore, what the point of reassurance that I would like to leave as a message for this House is linked to the current political situation. I don't want to introduce politics into this, but this current political situation has a theory, a conspiracy theory going, that somebody is coming after Pakistan's nuclear weapons, and at the end of the day, Pakistan's nuclear weapons are the target. There may or may not be any truth to that, but since we believe that nuclear weapons are here to stay, I think nuclear weapons, you can be reassured that in Pakistan, they're not going away, and there's nobody coming to take away your nuclear weapons. We have to manage them. There has to be a narrative about the nuclear weapons, which is South Asia specific, which is, of course, the narrative is that it is for the deterrence of aggression against Pakistan. And as long as they do not become a security threat to any other country, and as long as they do not become a security threat in the context of this another theory that some terrorist will come and take over Pakistan nuclear weapons. As long as these two or three aspects are taken care of, I think Pakistan's nuclear weapons are here to stay. On that note, I think I would like to just update the House on one development which Dr. Ansar Pervez had also mentioned about fusion becoming one possible source of nuclear energy in the future. All nuclear power plants currently and in the past and in the foreseeable future are running on the scientific fission. But fusion only yesterday, as another scientific experiment came up at the Lawrence Livermore laboratories in California, where they have conducted a successful experiment where fusion has been successful as an experiment. It may take many, decades perhaps for it to be realized. And it has shown that fusion can produce cheaper and much more energy than compared with the fission process. And in the same context, there is also a parallel experiment in France, the ITER, International Thermonuclear Energy Reactor, which again is working towards the same objective of trying to create energy from the process of fusion. So I thought I'll just update this, that these are developments which are taking place in the nuclear energy world. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much to all our speakers.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. This brings us to the end of the first day proceedings of the conference. I thank each and every one of you for your presence and patience. You have been lovely audience. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Have a good evening. Thank you.